Hi there and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today is basically a part 2 of the modern web browser control discussion. Other people call it the Chromium control. Other people have referred to it as the Edge web browser control, WebView 2 control. However you name it, it's our new web browser control that we now have in access. In the previous video, and I'll have a link of it below, I couldn't go into any advanced programming because there was a bug with some of the new features in VBA. And as such, since they've been fixed now for a couple of weeks, I decided it was finally time to make that second video and do a little bit more of a deep dive into what we can achieve via some programming. And I guess illustrate the differences, what has changed between the old version and now this new version, because we no longer have the document, the object document that we can play with directly. So we had to come up with some workarounds and new ways to do things. All in all, it isn't complicated. It's just a question, like everything else in life, of knowing how. Once you know that, then you can put it into practice. The bulk of the way we previously worked will still be usable. We just have a little bit of an intermediary step that may be required, depending on what you're trying to do exactly. So today, let's dive into programming the new modern web browser control. Okay. Before really diving into samples and codes, per the usual, I'm just going to mention to you that a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is obviously available on my website, on my blog. I have probably the most extensive blog article currently available regarding this new modern web browser control. It covers the basics, but it also does have more advanced information. Okay, down here, retrieving information from the web page, current meta values, things like that. So you're going to see some of the more advanced programming, and we're going to be looking at that. There also is a second article in which I dive and explain the workaround that is currently necessary to be able to do some of the more advanced data extraction and things like that. So the links will be provided below, as always. But just know there are some support articles where you can literally copy paste code rather than trying to retype everything I'm doing today in this video. So what you need to understand before diving into examples is that basically the new modern web browser control is now automated. Yes, you're using VBA, but Microsoft has basically made a huge shift here in which the primary programming language is actually JavaScript. So you need to learn and understand JavaScript to be able to do any advanced functionalities. There are plenty of resources online to learn, and Google and search engines like that become your best friend. There's lots of substance out there. You just need to perform some searches. And obviously, reviewing videos like this, you're also going to see some of the basics. That said, now, because we're running through JavaScript, there are two commands that become critical for us. And they are the ExecuteJavascript method and the RetrieveJavascriptValue method. Now, what is the difference? Well, one executes a command, but you don't care about getting anything back from it. So it's just do this action and I'm done. The retrieve, on the other hand, is you're going to run some code, but it's going to return something back to you. And I want to know what it returns. So this guy here is you're retrieving information, hence its name, retrieve. It can be anything because JavaScript allows you to do anything. It can be functions to do calculations, so you're getting back numeric values. It can be you're getting information about the page, which is what we're going to talk about at one point, how you can extract data from the page. I want to know what's the title of the web page. Boom, here it is. I want to know, how many hyperlinks? What are the hyperlinks on a page? Boom, there you go. It's always going to be with the retrieve because you're wanting to get information back from the web page. Versus execute JavaScript could be, for instance, in my video where I showed how you can do zoom in and zoom out. Well, these are commands that we're going to execute against the page. I want to zoom in. I want to magnify it, but I don't need to get anything back. Just do it. Zoom in, zoom out. Same thing with like refresh a page. Well, that's a command. I just want to execute the command, refresh, but I don't need to know anything. I'm not retrieving any actual values. So that's the differentiating factor here. Execute simply executes and that's it. But the retrieve is it's going to do the command that you've asked, and then it's going to eventually return back some type of acknowledgement, some type of return value. It may not always be the value you're wanting, but you will get something back. And then it becomes important actually to test to make sure that you didn't get a null returned and that you got a valid value back that you can then use in your VBA to do whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Okay, so enough of the high-level technical overview here. Let's dive in. Let's do a little bit of programming. So as you can see, I've opened my demo database and I've opened my demo page here. It's the same database you've seen in multiple other videos. And for a first example, let's keep this simple before we dive into more advanced programming. How can we retrieve the complete HTML code of a page? Well, it's not hard. So in this demo, as you can see, you put any web page you want. You'll press load. It will load that web page into the web browser control that's here. And then once it's fully loaded, then a second tab will appear allowing you access to view the source code. So let's look at this in practice. We run it. We'll eventually get Google to load. Once it's loaded, as you see, the second tab appears. If I click on it, I have the HTML behind it. So how did I achieve this? Well, the first thing we need to know, like I said previously, is this is all done now with JavaScript. So you need to understand, you can go into the developer tools, go over to the console, and you can run JavaScript commands directly against the active web page that's there. And I know that if I take this command here and run it, oh, sorry, took too much. There we go. I get the HTML code. So the question becomes, how can I run this JavaScript code and get back what it's returning? Well, we just discussed that previously, right? We have two commands that we want to work with today. We have execute, which doesn't return information, but we have the RetrieveJavascriptValue, which returns the information that our command executes in JavaScript. So this is the guy we want. We want to use the RetrieveJavascriptValue to execute this command. So how do we do it? Very simply. Let's go into Design View. And you'll see here, I'm using the onChange. So when the person switches the tab. And what I'm doing is I'm saying here, when the person switches the tab to source control, so they purposely want to view the source control, then it's going to use the RetrieveJavascriptValue and run our JavaScript command, and it's going to set it to a variable, and then it's going to return the variable to the text box. So as you can see, this is, I'm using 2 lines. You could even bring it down to 1 line if you wanted. But that's all it is. You figure out the JavaScript command you want to run, and then you use the appropriate either ExecuteJavascript or RetrieveJavascriptValue method, depending on what you're doing. So in this case, we want to bring back information, so we use the RetrieveJavascriptValue. That's it. The rest of this is just functionality for making the page load and whatnot. It's not important for retrieving the page's source code. This is all you need to retrieve the page's source code. And it is on my blog. So that's the first example. So now we've got the full page. What happens if we want to go after specific aspects of a page? Well, that's not very complicated either. It's always going to be the same principle. It's a question of knowing the JavaScript and then running it. So let's say here we want to get the page title. Let's look at it in practice. It's going to load Google. I'm going to press page title, and there's the page title. How did I do that? Well, actually, before we do how did I do that, let's confirm that that actually is the title, because some of you may not believe it. It's very easy. We go into the developers tools and we can look in the head. And if we come down, title, it is indeed Google. Okay, right there. Okay, so how did I do it? Let's go back to the developer's tools. I shouldn't have closed it. It's once again a question of knowing the proper JavaScript command. And I happen to know that we can use document.title. As easy as that. So once again, we have two commands available to us. We're looking to bring back information, retrieve information. So we're going to use RetrieveJavascriptValue. So let's go into Design View. On the button, what am I doing? I am simply doing a RetrieveJavascriptValue for the JavaScript command document.title. That's it. We can change it for any website you want. devhut.net. So let's close this guy down, open it up. My blog will eventually load. And once it's fully loaded, the button becomes active for me. I press it. There you go. MS Access to resources, tutorials, and demos. And if you right click inspect and go into the elements under the head, you will find eventually one that says title, and I'm blind, I'm not seeing it. Title, MS Access, database, resources, tutorials, and demos. So that's all there is to retrieving something as simple as the title. What about retrieving the current URL? Where are we? What page? What URL are we on? That's not very complicated. And I have a separate video. There is a bug. So I'm telling you right now, there's a built-in command that we can use. We shouldn't use it. So once again, I'm going to drive you and direct you towards JavaScript. So let's open up the web page. It will load. Just give it a second. Okay. And if I come here, we press it, you'll see I get the location. But the bug, like I had shown previously, is if you run it again, the built-in command does not update. Yet using JavaScript does. So that's the bug. So that's why I say always use JavaScript to get your location, your URL. Now, how do we do that? Right click. Let's get, here we go, inspect. And we can use the console again. I come here and I know that if I use window.location.href, we get the current URL that you're viewing. So once again, let's go into Design View. Let's look at the buttons event. And you'll see here, there is the built-in location URL. Do not use this guy. Dangerous. It's unreliable. Instead, use RetrieveJavascriptValue and then the JavaScript command that we just discussed, window.location.href. That's it. As easy as that. Okay, so now we're starting to get into some more interesting things. What about retrieving the value out of an input, a text box, what we call a text box in Access, but in HTML they're called inputs. So let's take a look here at a simple example, get value. So here I'm loading Bing. So there's two things we need to know. You need to analyze the web page you're trying to retrieve the information from, and then you need to know the JavaScript that goes with it hand in hand. So let's first come here and inspect this guy. I want to retrieve what does the person input as a search. So let's go inspect. Now I've mentioned it numerous times. There's a bug. As you can see, every time you open the inspect, it brings you to the body, even though I clicked on a specific element. So we do it a second time and it will bring me to the element. And if you look here, oh, okay, it's not an input. In this case, it's actually a text area. But what I'm after here is the unique ID. And as you can see here, this text area has a unique ID of SB_form_Q. That is critical. That is a unique identifier for that element on the web page. With that knowledge, now we can write JavaScript to say, hey, I want to go get what is entered inside SB_form_Q. So now with that knowledge, we can come to the console. Well, let's first enter a value, right? I'm searching for, and now we can come back to the dev tool because we have an entry in that text area. And we could do that. And as you can see, we use document, get element by ID. We now know the ID from the element. Remember when we were on the element page, SB_form_Q. So that's what we do. And go and retrieve its value, its current value. And it returned, I'm searching for, just like what I entered. So now, knowing that, we can use the RetrieveJavascriptValue method, and boom, you entered, I'm searching for. So we'll just go and prove it, but that's all there is to it behind the button. It's a single line, you entered, and then here we go, RetrieveJavascriptValue, document, get element by ID, the ID of that element you're after, value. And it runs it and it returns whatever is in the text area at that moment. And so that's why you have to first, before you can dive into retrieving information from a page where the user's doing inputs, is you first have to analyze the page. And that's where it's important that the web page be built properly, where each element is given a unique ID. IDs are supposed to be unique, names not necessarily. So that's why I always highly, highly recommend, if you're able to, if you have any control over the web page you're going to be interacting with, is always make sure all the elements have unique IDs. Some developers don't always put IDs. You really, really should. So unique IDs will facilitate your ability via VBA to interact with the page. So we've done a couple examples now of retrieving information. Let's try just executing a command. I think I've already covered this in my previous video, but just briefly, let's look at what if you want to give the users a button to print out the content. Well, we come here, we'll load Google. It can be any page, makes no difference. And just to demonstrate once again, using the developers tool, that's what they're there for. Okay? And I know that if I'm in the console, I can come here and I can do window, point, print, open and close brackets. And if I run that, it's going to open the print dialog. And as you can see, then they can scroll and change the properties and do whatever they want. And when they're ready, they press print. It's the exact same dialog they'll see through Edge. And when they're ready, they press print and it comes out. And if we look at now implementing it, so now via a button, you get the same result as I got through the developers tool. How did I do that? Well, once again, we have two commands. Now, in this instance, we're not trying to get anything back from the command. We just want it to do something. We want it to open the print dialog, and that's it. We don't care. We don't need any information back. So in such an instance, we're going to use the ExecuteJavascript method. So if we open in Design View, click on the print button and go and check its click event, you will see I use the ExecuteJavascript against the command that I previously showed you, window.print, open and close brackets. And that's it. So now you can print any web page you want, or at least give your users the ability to do so, since we don't have any of the menus, right? That's one thing I was a little surprised. There's no command to be able to enable any of the menus or bars that you have, for instance, via Edge. So previously I showed you how you can get something like, say, like the title, which is its own tag on its own. So it's easier to retrieve, shall we say, than let's say if we were going and trying to target a specific meta value. So meta tags, you can have multiple meta tags in a web page and they have different names. So for instance, let's say we wanted to get the description of a web page. Now, of course, these are optional. So the tags aren't necessarily on every page. So you have to be ready for that. But if you know you're going to be analyzing some websites and you're confident they'll have the description, let's take a look at what we can do. So here I'm opening Bing. And if we right click and bring up the developer tools, just to show you, and we look under the elements, let it load, go in the head section, you'll see here there's a whole slew of meta tags. And some of them have names attributed to them. As you can see here, theme color, the description, that's the guy we're going to be trying to get. Viewport. So there's a whole slew of different ones. And we are going to try to bind to the description one. I want to retrieve here what the description is. This guy here. This is what I'm after. So I'm not going to bore you with the details. Once again, this always comes back to JavaScript. Well, I know that if I come and I put in this guy here using a query selector for meta tags, and then I'm specifying I want the one that has the name that is description. And here, there is one exception. I have double quotes for the VBA. There we go. That would be the proper command to run. Okay. Now, I'm going to copy this for a second. Knowing that, then I'm able to implement it and retrieve it via VBA. So let's just take a glance at it for a second. I'm going to use the buttons click event. So what did I do? I'm just going to come here for a second to illustrate just one thing most people are familiar with. But when I use the RetrieveJavascriptValue, the JavaScript command, don't forget, because we're in VBA, we have to double up. See here, double up our quotes. Okay? Otherwise, you get errors. So that's the only thing you need to be aware of. Double up your quotations to be on the safe side. And then the exact same command that we have in JavaScript, now you're able to run in VBA. And since we are trying to get back information, we're trying to retrieve the description, therefore we use the RetrieveJavascriptValue method. You'll also notice in this case here, just a precautionary measure, but I am using an if statement first. I am first validating the fact that this command returns a value and that it isn't returning null. Okay, so it isn't returning null, therefore there's a proper value, so I'm going to retrieve that value. But if it returns null, then I'm instead returning description meta tag not present. So let's illustrate that. We were just on Bing, so I'm going to switch it out from Bing. I'm going to switch to Google. Reopen the exact same form, but now we're going to Google. Now we use the get description, and you'll see it's returning description meta tag not present. So that means the retrieve JavaScript isn't getting a value back from the JavaScript command that we're executing. And we can confirm this once again by using developer tools under head and looking at the metas. There is no meta with a name description. So there's no description on Google's homepage. So once again, just to illustrate the two things, you use your JavaScript command, but make sure you double up your quotes. And it can be very important to harden your code a little bit and ensure that you are getting values back by validating that they don't return a null. Now, if you'd like, one thing I found useful, instead of always flipping back and forth into the developer tools, don't get me wrong, they're excellent and they help us analyze things much quicker than what we used to have to do. But sometimes we just want to do quick tests in VBA to see what's happening exactly. Well, you could build something like this guy here. So what is it? You're going to see I have a web browser control here, which is currently loading my blog. I've added a text box up here where I can write in any JavaScript command I want, and then here it will run it. And it will return whatever this guy returns back into this text box down below. So, for instance, as we discussed, you can do document.title, title, and get value. We'll bring it down here. You could do, for instance, on this page, get element by tag name. So go get me the heading level 2. Go get me the first one. Oops, I'm missing an L. And if we do that, it will run. And as you can see, I already know there's an error. And there we go. It takes longer when there's an error. RetrieveJavascript timed out. So what is that telling me? That's actually telling me that there are no H2 tags on this page. And I can prove it if we try, let's say, an H1, so the heading level 1, we get the value immediately. So it's this guy here is a heading level 1. If we do inspect on it, we can confirm that. We do it a second time because of the bug. And as you can see here, there's an iframe. Where are you hiding, H1? What am I missing? Oh, sorry, here we go. H1, and this is what's inside the H1. And that's what you see there. It's actually a link. So if you click on that title, it actually is a link back to the home page. And if we were to come, let's say here, and now say instead of getting me the first one, go get me the second one, you'll see it's updated to where it says new Windows YouTube playlist. So this guy here, if we do inspect, it should bring us down. It is indeed an H1, and this is its content, which is once again a link, but in this case it's a link to the actual article itself. So just this can be the type of little utility you can put together quickly if ever you wanted to, and then you're able to test out how VBA responds, not just how JavaScript responds, which we can do by using the console, but we can use this to see, like I showed you, that if you try to get an H2, there are no H2s, so you'd see that VBA actually returns an error. So once again, this is the type of thing that you may want to test for and then act accordingly so your users don't get crashes or weird messages returned that they weren't expecting. So this is a prime example where you could use an if statement, test for this return value, and then say there are no H2 values. And so now you have a little utility that you can use to do some simple testing and validation of JavaScript code. Next, let's look at a more advanced example of extracting data from a web page. And this can be anything you're after. I'm going to give some examples here of pulling headings, pulling out links, pulling out images. But it can be any element you're after, and you can tunnel down to whatever degree of detail that you need to filter on. It's always the same thing. It's a question of knowing the JavaScript. But here, let's just take a look here. I'm going to load Bing. I'm going to press my button, get metadata, and we have to wait a second. It has to do what it's doing. And then you'll see here, I'm extracting here a listing of all the headings, level 1 through, I forget what it was, 5, I think, but in this case, there's only up to a level 3, and I'm illustrating what it is. Then I have here a listing of all the links on the web page and where they link to. It goes on and on and on. As you can see, Bing has a lot of stuff you're not seeing. And then lastly, I have here a whole slew of all of the images that are on that page in one shape, form, or another. So all the image elements. How did I do it? Let's take a look in detail. We look at the click event for the button. We'll open this guy up. Everything happens in this sub. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm creating an HTML document object variable. Then I'm setting its inner HTML to be the actual web page's inner HTML. So basically I'm making a virtual web page in memory that I can work with, rather than always having to go back to the web page and execute commands against the web page, just because it can be slow, especially when the entities don't exist. Don't get me wrong. We could do it at this level over and over and over and keep repeating retrieve JavaScript. However, it's not an efficient way to work at all. And especially when it doesn't find the element you're after, you saw previously, there are big delays that can occur. So instead, it's much more efficient. Go get the entire HTML, pass it to an object variable, and then just work with that directly in VBA. It'll be much faster. And then here, for instance, for the headings, I'm just iterating 1 over 5. So I'm doing H1 through H5. And I'm saying, go get me for the length, so for the number of H, whatever we're on, so the number of H1 elements, and then return me information about that element. So what was the level, so H1, H2, H3, and then here, what was its inner HTML. So typically it would be the title, but it could also be other information. And then I output it. It's a string with a line return, so it outputs nicely in the text box. Then we look here at links. So we're looking at by tag name, we're looking at the A elements. And it's the same thing. I'm doing it based on the number that are on the page. So if there are none, it's just going to skip over this, go to the next one. Otherwise, it's going to iterate over them one by one. And here I'm extracting the href. But there are other attributes we could get if we wanted. The target, the name, the ID. So I'm just showing here, I'm just extracting where are they redirecting us to. That's all I was going after. Similarly for images. Once again, by tag name, we're just going to retrieve the image elements. Then we iterate over the count, and I'm outputting here the source. So where is that image coming from? You could once again get the name, the ID, all sorts of other information if that's what you were after. But this is all it is. So I'm creating an initial variable, and then I'm using that variable because it's in memory. It's much faster. And I just iterate and extract and look at what I'm after. And with that, you can, actually, let's bring that guy back. You can use it on any web page you want. So I did Bing. Let's do... Right. So now, if we do it on my own blog, let it load. Once it's fully loaded, I will be able to extract the information. And there you go. So as you can see, I got the H1s. As you see, there are no H2s. We had already confirmed that. But there are H3 and H4 even. Then we come down here. It's all the links on my web page and where they redirect you to. And then here we're into the images on the web page. And that's it. I hope that this helps a few of you out there to learn how you can actually go and retrieve specific information about specific elements, element types. And it always comes back down to the JavaScript. You know, here I'm using the get elements by tag. You can do it by name, by ID, by class. You know, the whole world of JavaScript is available to you to work with. So embrace it, and you'll be amazed at what you can do if you need to. Well, I'm going to stop here for this first part in this two-part series about advanced automation. I will do another video next week that will cover even deeper advanced automation where you're able to get IntelliSense and things like that for the different attributes relating to the web page elements. But that will be in another video because this one is starting to run a little long. So I do hope this enlightens you a little bit about what you can potentially do right out of the box with the new modern web browser control. If you don't mind, like, subscribe, and share. Leave me some comments. Let me know what you thought of the video, but also if there's specific things that you guys need to be able to do, specific elements you're trying to retrieve information about. Perhaps I can include that in my next video. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me today. It is greatly appreciated, and we will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.